Welcome back, everybody. Appreciate you joining me here today on this brand new Cabral Concept, episode 32, 39 of the show. On this show, I'm going to be linking up to other shows, so head on over there if you want all of the big takeaways. And I've got my buddy Walter with me here today. Anytime we've got our model here for you, you know it's going to be an in-depth show breaking down all of the science, but truly from a foundational level that I believe is really important for you to know. And the reason is it starts to then dispel a lot of the myths that you hear. So when you read things on social media or hear it on the news, you say, no, that's not actually the whole picture, right? You're giving me part of the picture, but not the whole picture. So today we're going to actually talk about how your body stores sugar, aka carbohydrates, and how it also burns it for fuel. That way there, you know that you don't need to be on a low-carb diet for the rest of your life. You don't need to be afraid of carbohydrates. And you can also know how you can use them to your advantage for fuel and ATP. So let's talk about that here today. There's two basic ways that our body is going to break down these stored fuels in our body. And sometimes they're used interchangeably. So, and I've done it myself as well. I want to say guilty of that. And what I want to say is, from a physiology standpoint, they're two different things. Sometimes we use them interchangeably, but they're not. I want to go into the science here today and just make it really crystal clear. So our body can basically break down stored sugar, which we'll talk about, through a process called glycogenolysis. Or it could break down glycerols from fat or amino acids from protein, right? Basically from muscle or our food. And that's a process called gluconeogenesis. But what's the end result? The end result is providing us with actual glucose in our bloodstream and energy in order to fuel our body. Why is this important? Because once you know that the body needs a certain level of sugar in the bloodstream, you can begin to understand why a no-carb diet or a very low-carb diet, especially for a longer period of time, can start to cause a greater stress on the body because it uses up all of its storehouses of glycogen inside of the liver, which we're going to talk about in 1 second. And it is then forced to look for other fuel sources. Could be ketones, could be the breakdown of our own muscle tissue through gluconeogenesis, or the proteins in our food, which is just a bit more complicated in order to fuel the body. So here's what happens when we eat, especially carbohydrates, but some proteins, it begins to raise our blood sugar levels. And again, that's not a bad thing because it can actually be very beneficial as long as it's not too high for our leptin and ghrelin levels. That's our hormone and satiety levels, or hormone satiety craving levels, meaning the body gets carbohydrates. They're like, oh, great, we ate. It's calming stress and cortisol levels, the only food that really does that, and helping to balance thyroid levels as well. And not to mention, it feeds the good gut bacteria like the Firmicutes and Bacteroides that balance weight loss, right? So carbohydrates are actually very important. Now, do we want to spike our blood sugar to 200? Of course not, right? Like that's not what we're looking for. But some carbohydrates, especially throughout the day, not really a bad thing, right? It's not. Again, if we overeat any one macro, there's protein, there's fat, there's carbs. You overeat any one of those, you're going to gain weight. You overeat any one of those, it's going to be more challenging to lose weight, right? People pick on carbohydrates because carbohydrates also bring in water storage with it. So it's just a faster way to lose weight, right? That's a big part of it. And honestly, blood sugar does play into a part of it, right? That does take into account. So here's what happens. We eat carbohydrates or a large amount of protein at one particular meal. It brings up our blood sugar levels. And then our pancreas, underneath, you can't really see it on this model right here on Walter. Underneath, if I pull them all apart, you could. The pancreas begins to release insulin. Now that insulin is going to take the blood sugar only down to a certain level because we always need glucose in our bloodstream, right? Usually between 70 and 95 is quite healthy. And it's going to pull the glucose, right? The blood sugar, the glucose, same thing, into the liver, which is right here underneath the right side of our rib cage, this large red organ that we talk about quite a lot here in the show because it's so important. And it's going to store anywhere between basically 90 and 120 grams of sugar stored as glycogen, right? So that's really important to know. You don't need to know all the terms. The term for that is glycogenesis. It is the process of storing glycogen in the liver and muscles. Now it stores it essentially for a rainy day when it needs it in the future. But think of it as like buckets. If let's just say there's like 5 buckets. Once those 5 buckets are full, that's it. No more glycogen can fit, no more glucose can fit inside of the liver. So it's also then going to bring your muscles. Now, here's the amazing thing about your muscles. Depending on how much muscle you have, you can store about 400, right? About 4 times as much glycogen in your muscle cells. So now we can use that for energy, exercise, but also storage if your liver runs out of stored glycogen as well. So now we have 2 places that we can store excess carbohydrates that we don't use at that meal. So why is this important? Well, then when we need it overnight, when our blood sugar drops too low, we're exercising and we drop too low in blood sugar. We haven't eaten carbs for a bit. We're in more sympathetic nervous system dominance, fight or flight. There are 2 processes that we can break down. The first one is we can break down our stored glycogen for fuel to raise blood sugar levels. Remember, just because you don't eat carbohydrates doesn't mean that your body doesn't need glucose. This is really important for both body and brain. Now, people will come back and say, your brain and everything functions just fine off ketones. Okay, it can function off of ketones, but that doesn't necessarily mean it thrives off of ketones. And yes, there are particular studies in brain cancer and other things where ketosis could be a potentially great thing to be in. But unless you're in that medical-based setting, I can show you study after study that being in a state of chronic ketosis more than 3 to 4 weeks can increase stress levels, can increase all-cause mortality, shrinks the gut microbiome, which again, if you have gut overgrowth, that's why people are getting some results. So I could go all through it. So you can make debates on both sides. What I'm saying is that you don't need to cut out all carbohydrates or even below that 50 grams a day that's often recommended or below 25, especially for most keto-based diets, if you don't want to. That's the thing. I just want to help people to understand is like you can get the results you want without having to go that low in carbohydrates. And I think that that's important to look at. So what I want to share with you is this, is we break down our stored glycogen stores through a process called glycogenolysis, right? So that lysis means we are breaking down what is stored. In this case, it is glycogen. Now, the body can bring that stored sugar into the bloodstream just enough, hopefully, to bring up blood sugar levels to make sure we're not lightheaded, we're not dizzy, and that we have the fuel that we need. And let's say we run out of the stores in our liver, we can use another process called gluconeogenesis. Maybe a little bit more taxing on the body, where the body can actually break down muscle tissue or proteins from food through a process called gluconeogenesis that uses the amino acids in order to give us that glucose that we need in a little bit of a roundabout way. It can do it. And the same can happen from glycerol, from fat breakdown as well. And to a lesser degree, lactate during the exercise-based process of anaerobic-based exercise, like sprinting or something to that degree. So what I wanted to share here today is that no matter what, your body functions very efficiently, very well on a balance of carbohydrates, fat, and protein. They all have their own role. Like that's the thing. Protein, I don't want to go through every single one, but literally when you think of fat, okay, we need this obviously for the nervous system, for the brain, and so much in the body, for hormones, for protein. It is what our body is made up of, right? We need this for tissue repair and so much more. Carbohydrates, though, are the easiest preferred fuel in the body. It's like, it's plain and simple. It's the easiest to be able to fuel your body. It's not the only thing. But what I'm saying is most people, they go low on carbs mainly because of body transformation. And the nice thing is that once you know that your body stores 100 or so grams in the liver of carbohydrates, essentially a blood sugar glucose per day, not per day, but when you burn through it, and then it has stores for 400, depending on what you're using it for your muscles for, you can eat a fair amount of carbohydrates. You have to balance that overall, though, with your total macro intake, the amount of calories from protein, carbs, and fat. So every gram of fat that you eat, it's 9 calories. Every gram of protein that you eat, it's 4 calories. Every gram of carbs that you eat, it's 4 calories, right? Now, there's a thermogenic effect of food. I'm not going to go through that today. When you eat protein, essentially more of it gets burnt up through the digestive-based process. I don't disagree with that. That's why protein does. I've said it on many podcasts. Protein is a body transformation fuel. There's no doubt about that. Now, is that mutually inclusive or synonymous with longevity? Doesn't seem to be that way. Doesn't mean that you can't eat a good amount of protein, but when you start doing 1-for-1 with each pound of body weight or 1 to 1.5, you can get into some gray area where it actually may be detrimental to longevity, right? Not necessarily body transformation. I'm never going to deny that. I used it myself when I was in my 20s, but I want you just to be a little bit more careful of that if you're erring on the side of longevity. All right, the last part I want to state with you is this. This is actually really important. The way that you get to enjoy more carbohydrates is through exercise. It really is. It's intermittent fasting, not overdoing it, basically stopping eating 2 to 3 hours before bed, and eating an hour or 2 after waking. For most people, it's going to be around 12 to 14 hours, right? So that's enough of a fast on a daily basis for most people. Some days can do what I call the 1-day reset diet a week, 1 day of fasting from dinner one night to dinner the next, but I have another podcast on that. And then you have your quarterly detox, which is like 2.5 days. But again, that's another podcast. So here's the thing. But in addition to that, we need to burn through our glycogen stores. Why? So that we get to then refill them with the carbohydrates that we eat. That's such like a big part of it that's so important. And it's why, even if you don't love exercise, getting your body moving for 10,000 steps a day, using a sauna, that's basically passive, but it's like zone 2 cardio. It legitimately is. It's a real, true, healthy biohack. Okay, so between walking and sauna, not overly exerting yourself, you're going to be burning through a lot of calories per day. And since it's at a lower level intensity, a lot of that is going to be carbohydrate, fat, like storage. Like both of those are going to be true, right? So we use blood sugar as we're in a steady state of cardio, like zone 2. And we're going to be able to burn body fat at the same time. So like that's a hack that bodybuilders have known forever. Were they using sauna as much? Well, only to dehydrate. So I would say no in that regard. But bodybuilders, when they're looking to cut low, slow cardio, walking, incline walking, etc. And that's because it can be really exceptional. Now, for other people in my practice, and again, this isn't medical advice, medical treatment plans, medical cures, medical diagnosis, but especially when I work with clients with diabetic or who are diabetics type 1 or type 2. If we're looking to really bring down blood sugar levels and balance them, of course, you need to work with your doctor on your insulin levels. We do cardio, legitimate cardio. Because if you know your blood sugar, you'll know that sometimes resistance training or boot camps or things like that, HIIT training, can raise blood sugar levels. I know it sounds crazy, but think about it. When you raise cortisol levels, you're telling your body you're in fight or flight. And so we can sometimes dump sugar, right? Stored glycogen into your bloodstream. When you're doing low, slow cardio, now I'm not saying it's the only thing that you should do. It starts to bring down your blood sugar levels. It's, again, another great healthy hack. That's why when you walk for 20 to 30 minutes after a meal, it doesn't allow your blood sugar to spike as much. It's called postprandial glucose reduction or limitation. And it's a limiting factor. Like it slows blood sugar from coming up. So it's another great thing to do, especially after dinner, because you don't want your blood sugar up for the night. So it's a great thing to take your dog out, go for a walk with your partner, with your family. Amazing thing to be able to do. So the nice thing is this: when you burn more of this glycogen on a daily basis, then you get to replenish it almost free, right? Because let's go back to those 5 buckets. If you empty the 5 buckets every day, you get to refill them every day without adding body fat. So that carbs that you eat go to refilling the glycogen storehouses. Now remember, if you overeat on anything, carbs, protein, or fat, it will cause you to gain weight, but let's not just blame it on carbohydrates alone, all right? Hopefully this was helpful. Please let me know if there's any questions. I'm happy to do a follow-up. Again, all the show notes and previous podcasts I referred to will be at stephencabral.com/3239. Have an amazing day. I'll be back tomorrow on the Cabral Concept. Thanks so much for tuning into today's show. Before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I want to make sure that you're getting our daily content, not missing out on anything functional medicine, wellness, weight gain, weight loss, anti-aging, living longer, stronger, and all of the most cutting-edge research. And if there's any topics you want to hear, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Take care.